Hello and welcome to the first installation of the virtual Latin American Cuisine Summit series with Chef Rick Martinez, who will be showing us how he makes chiles anchos rellenos de queso, which you'll soon discover are a regional style of dried chili that is stuffed with cheese. Sounds incredible, right? Today's exciting webinar is produced by SmartBrief and is presented by the Culinary Institute of America and the Texas Beef Council, which is a nonprofit organization that operates the Beef Checkoff program in Texas, funded by the state's farmers and ranchers. Its mission is to promote beef through various educational research and marketing initiatives. My name is Mackenzie Puddesy with SmartBrief, and I'm excited to host this session for you today. Not only have I spent years of my life based in Latin America as a sommelier and working in culinary tourism, but chiles rellenos was in fact the first recipe I ever saw referenced in Spanish literature when I was first learning the language. So I have a special attachment to this recipe today. At today's summit, you will gain an in-depth knowledge of a signature dish of the Latin kitchen, explore traditional techniques, and discover the culinary influences that continue to shape the industry. While chefs might be familiar with the more common variant of this dish that uses poblano chiles, the recipe being demoed today uses ancho chiles, poblanos in their dried form, for a smoky, sweet heat. I'm sure you're eager to get started with the demo, so I'll quickly go through a few housekeeping points to help you get the most of your time with us here today. First, I want to draw your attention over to the questions section of your webinar console. This is the best place to get involved, get interactive, and post all your insightful questions, comments, feedback, and ideas. In fact, why don't you find that questions tab now and give it a test run by saying, hi, hello, or if you want to fit today's theme, hola, to the community with us here today. As a quick side note, that is also the best place to reach out and let us know if you have any technical issues during the session. And don't forget that a simple browser refresh should clear up any of the more common issues with slides or audio. But if not, just shoot a message and in that questions tab, our team will be here to help. And the last thing I want to point out on your audience console is the handouts tab. Go check out the resources available, including the full written recipe from today's session. You'll definitely want to save that for later. Okay, well, that is it for the housekeeping, so let's get Chef Rick Martinez out here for the live demo. If you are not familiar with Chef Martinez, let me introduce you. Rick Martinez is the celebrated Mexican-American cookbook author, New York Times bestseller, recipe developer, and food personality who has built an incredible following for his vibrant food and fun personality. His debut book, Mi Cocina, Recipes and Rapture from My Kitchen in Mexico, is a James Beard Award winner, IACP Cookbook of the Year, IACP Best International Cookbook, and New York Times bestseller, and serves as a transporting tribute to his family's homeland of Mexico and a personal exploration of Rick's self-identity as a third-generation Mexican-American who built his career in a predominantly white world of food media. Rick is also the host of the podcast Borderline Salty with Carla Lali Music and is a regular contributor to the New York Times and Food 52, appearing as the host of Food 52's Sweet Heat, which IACP awarded as a Best Food Series. Furthermore, Rick is a correspondent for Magnolia Workshops, teaching a chef's guide to Mexican cooking, and hosts Pruébalo, meaning try it, his travel show with Babish Culinary Universe, exploring food, people, and culture in Mexico. Rick was formerly the senior food editor at Bon Appetit, where his work earned him a nomination for a prestigious James Beard Award in 2020, along with his recent win for Mi Cocina in 2023. With so many accolades behind his name and such a clear passion for sharing cuisine, there is no doubt that today will be one to remember. So with that, I'm going to hand things over to Rick in his cocina. Rick, take it away.
In Mexico, dried chiles are actually pretty commonly used to stuff. Sometimes along the coast, they're filled with seafood, and it's a cold preparation, almost like a seafood salad, inside an unbattered, unfried, just soft and sometimes rehydrated dried chile. In this preparation, what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be filling it with cheese. We are going to batter it and fry it like you would do a chile poblano, but we're going to soften the chile ancho in a little bit of orange juice and some spices and a little bit of garlic. It's going to be really, really delicious. And I think it's a little bit easier because you don't have to char and then peel and clean the chile poblano. Let's get started. These are chile anchos. They are the ripened, fully and red chile poblanos. They're left on the plant to get fully ripened, and what happens is they develop a lot of flavor, a lot of sweetness, a lot of the sugars. So they have a lot of similar qualities to a red bell pepper, but with the flavor of a poblano. And then they're picked and then they're dried, usually in the sun, and you get this beautiful, soft, pliable, almost like dried fruit. There's notes of apricot and prune in this, and it should be very soft and pliable. Most grocery stores now have better quality dried chiles, but if your chile is dry or brittle or dusty, I would say don't buy it. Find something else in that store or go to a different store. So what you want to do is you want to find big chile anchos. This is also a chile ancho, but you can see the difference in size. We want to be able to open it up and stuff a lot of cheese in there, and say you want something bigger. So now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to make a little bitty slit up at the top. This is a sharp paring knife, and all I want to do is go in. It doesn't have to be really, really large, but I want to go in and get rid of the seeds. So you can see these seeds are pretty big, and they're completely edible, and there are actually quite a number of moles in Mexico that use the seeds and stems of the chiles. But because they're larger, they're a little bit woodier, and they develop tannic flavors. And so when you use them in your salsas or your guisos, what ends up happening is you get sort of this astringent, bitter flavor from the tannins in the seeds. So I typically do not like to use them. And then this is ready to soak. So we're just going to continue doing this with the other chile anchos. All right, so now we're going to grate a garlic. So I just want to peel this. I'm using a rather large clove of garlic because I love this flavor. And then I'm going to just finely grate this. I prefer finely grating garlic in pretty much all of my cooking. I just feel like it melts into the dish much more evenly and flavorfully than a chop. And to this, we're going to add a teaspoon of Mexican oregano. Obviously, if you don't have Mexican, you can use Italian, that's fine. I'm gonna give it a little bit of a crunch before we go in. These are some very large leaves. They're really, really beautiful. I actually prefer Mexican oregano in Mexican cooking. I find that the Mexican oregano is a little bit more floral, a little bit less bitter. Certainly than Greek oregano, but more so than a lot of the oreganos that you'll find in the grocery stores in the US. I'm also using a little bit of allspice, so this is going to be half a teaspoon of ground allspice. I actually ground this. To be honest, until I moved to Mexico, I didn't really use allspice very much in my cooking, but it's grown here. And I was actually touring some coffee farms in Veracruz, and I was staying at this little hotel, and at the bottom of a mountain, and they were growing and harvesting the allspice berries at the top of the mountain, and I woke up to the smell of the wafting allspice coming off the mountain. It was insanely incredible. I had never smelled, to be honest, I think most of the allspice I ever had in the US in those little containers kind of didn't smell like anything, which is probably why I never used it. I think it was just seemed very dusty and flavorless until I got here. And then I realized, this is what allspice is. It's a little bit of anise, a little bit of clove, and a little bit of cinnamon. It's really, really incredible. So I think it pairs really well with a lot of Mexican guisos and moles, and I use it quite often. So now I'm going to mix my orange juice with the grated garlic and the oregano. And I'm going to add half a teaspoon or 2 grams of sea salt. I use sea salt from Colima, which is a state here on the coast in Mexico. I love it. I think it's some of the best sea salt that I've ever had. Also, it's very close to me, so it's better for the universe. But you can use 2 grams of whatever salt you have or like. I'm just going to whisk this up to incorporate everything. And now all we're going to do is soak the chiles. Okay, so now we're just going to take our chile ancho and we're going to dip it into the orange juice. And I'm going to do one at a time, and I want to kind of go in, open it up a little bit, and make sure that the juice is getting inside the ancho and that all of these delicious flavors are basically coating every surface. And then we'll just do the same with all the rest. All right, so now we're going to let the chile ancho sit for about 30 minutes to just kind of soften. I'm going to look at them every couple of minutes, give them a little flip, make sure that everybody's like playing nicely in the marinade. But now we're going to work on the salsa. So I'm going to make for you a cooked salsa tatemada. So we're going to char our ingredients, and then we're going to blend it and then fry it in a little bit of manteca because I love manteca. You don't have to use manteca. You can use olive oil to keep this a plant-based dish. Save the cheese, obviously, but I think the manteca adds a little bit of character, and to me, it moves it from salsa de mesa to an actual, almost like a guiso that I'm going to obviously cover the chile anchos, and so that's what we're going to do. All right, so first thing we're going to do is prep our veg. I am a pretty big fan of just using a quarter of an onion for most of my salsas. I feel like that is the perfect amount of onion flavor. I also always use white onions. That's typically what is used here in Mexico. People use red onions a lot more in the southern part of the country. In the middle and northern part of the country, it's mainly the cebolla blanca. Obviously, I love the red onions as well, especially with pickled red onions. Yellow onions are almost impossible to find here. But in any case, use the onion that you have access to. So I'm going to quarter this, and I will save that for many other salsas. I am also going to be using jalapeno and serrano. I love this flavor, the combination of the sort of meatiness. There's a little bit more of a vegetal note that exists in the jalapeno. They're also not quite as spicy. I think they're less spicy in the US than they are here. The serranos are going to give us a little bit more heat. And I also find that these are a little bit sharper, a little grassier. They kind of don't linger on the tongue. They sort of get in, burn you, and get out. Whereas the jalapenos sort of linger and have a much more sort of vegetal, herby flavor. So that is what we're going to use. I'm also using Roma tomatoes. These are pretty common, almost used exclusively all over the country. There are some heirlooms or tomates de rancho or jitomates, depending on what part of the country you're in. But this is what I have access to, and these are really, really nice. I'm also not a big fan of coring them beforehand. You can core them if you want. The cores here or in these tomatoes are not that big, and so I'm just going to go ahead and blend those up. No sense in adding to the landfill. So now we are ready to char. Okay, I'm going to be using my black steel comal. This is pretty much what I always use when I'm making tortillas or when I'm charring vegetables for a salsa. So what I always do, and I would do this with any pan that I'm using, whether it's cast iron, black steel, or stainless steel, I want to cover it with foil. So what that's going to do is it's going to, make cleanup a lot easier, but it's also going to protect your skillet. When you char, especially tomatoes or tomatillos, they're going to stick to the bottom of your skillet, and it's going to be really, really hard to scrape that off. And I don't want to damage anything. I mean, I'm not going to damage my comal, so I'm not really worried about that. But It's going to make things a lot easier. The other thing you want to remember is this is the time to use your vent. Maybe open a window. It's going to get really, really smoky. So we're going to crank this on high. And we're just going to throw all of our vegetables down. And it's going to take, depending on your flame and your skillet, it's going to take about 6 to 8 minutes for the tomatoes, or if you're using tomatillos, maybe a minute or two less. It's going to take about 4 to 6 for the onion, and a little bit less for the chiles, also depending on the size. I'm actually going to throw in a garlic clove as well, so we can get that delicious flavor. And I'm going to leave the skin on the garlic because I want the garlic to cook in the jacket, and it'll also protect it. It will still get char marks on the inside, but it's not going to get like super, super burnt, which I don't necessarily want for this salsa. All right, I'm going to turn on the fan, and I'm not going to talk anymore. And this is the amount of char that you're looking for. All right, now throw everything into the blender. We're going to put the lid on, and we're going to blend this. So I always start on the lowest speed and gradually work your way up. I don't want this to be a super smooth sauce. I want like little bits and pieces in there, so I'm not going to crank it all the way up. You can also do this in batches if your blender is a little bit smaller. All right, so I've got a medium cast iron skillet. I have cranked the heat up to high, and I'm letting this get super, super hot. So to that, I've got 2 tablespoons of manteca. This is rendered lard from my favorite purveyor of lard here in Mazatlan. You don't have to use lard. Don't use hydrogenated. A lot of times you can find it in the grocery stores in the US in boxes, and it looks like Crisco. And to me, it doesn't have great flavor, and also you don't want anything hydrogenated because that's going to change the texture of your salsa. So I would just opt for either olive oil or vegetable oil if you don't want to use lard or can't find good lard. So just drop that in, and we want to melt that and get it super, super hot to the point where you see little wisps of smoke. What we're going to do is a technique that's very common in Mexico. You're basically going to fry your salsa. This happens often with moles, guisos, and even some salsas de mesa. What this does is it not only concentrates the flavor very quickly, but all of those little particles that are in your sauce are going to caramelize when it hits the super fat oil. It's also going to help emulsify the salsa, particularly when you're doing this with a mole and you have nuts and seeds and herbs and spices and plantains, fruits, vegetables, and dried chiles. It will actually bring everything together, and it'll be able to hold on to and emulsify with the oils that you have in the salsa. Okay, so what's going to happen is we're going to pour the salsa really, really quickly. It's going to spit and sputter pretty violently for the first few seconds, and then it'll calm down once you pour everything in. To me, the best way to do this is to do this as quickly as possible. The slower you go, the more you're going to create a big mess. So what you want to do is you might want to wear long sleeves, protect your arms. You might want to have an apron on, or you might want to have a little kitchen shield to protect you, but also to cover it so it doesn't completely mess up your stove. So I've got this. You can see we're smoking pretty well now. And I've got my salsa. I've got my shield. Here we go. And that is exactly what it's supposed to do. So you could see, the flames were just a little bit of added bonus because I did actually heat the pan probably a little more than I should have. But that's the kind of reaction you want. So obviously the salsa at the top that was poured in last is not going to get that charred caramelly flavor, but all of the salsa that hit the pan that created those flames is going to be really, really nicely caramelized. So you're going to have that combination of the bitterness from the char, but then you're going to have like some really beautiful caramelized sugars that existed when we dropped the salsa in. I'm going to crank the fan and let that cook. Okay, so I reduced this to a simmer. So we're just going to let that cook for about between 5 and 10 minutes, cook it down a little bit. But before that, I'm going to add some salt. I'm also going to be using some chicken bouillon powder. That's a very common ingredient here in Mexico. Box stock really isn't a common thing. And so a lot of times what people do instead of using box stock or homemade stock, they'll use a chicken bouillon. I like the flavor because it does also, or at least the brand that I'm using has some MSG in it. So I really like that little MSG kick. But you don't have to use it, completely optional. So it's salt and 2 teaspoons of the bouillon powder. And we're just going to stir that in and then let that simmer and come together. And you can actually make this salsa in advance. Make it, put it in the fridge, airtight container, and it'll keep for about 5 days. You can also freeze it for up to a month. Okay, let's go work on the chiles. All right, so it's been just over 30 minutes and these chile anchos have been soaking. I kind of zhuzhed them up every now and then and flipped them over just to make sure that all sides were nice and soft. And so now what we're gonna do, you can see they're like really, really super soft now. And they've even started to change color a little bit. They're actually becoming more brick red and not that sort of dark mahogany color. And that's exactly what you want. And so all I want to do is kind of drain them because we are going to fry these. So make sure you get as much of the liquid out of the inside as possible. And then we're just going to lay them on a baking sheet with a rack and then just let them dry out a little bit. Mainly I just want the skins, the outside of them, dry. And you can put the cut side down so that any residual liquid that's inside can leak out. And it's okay if there's still some moisture on the inside. That's just going to help to keep it nice and soft. Also, we're going to be stuffing it with cheese, so there's that. All right, and that's all we need to do. So we're just going to let these sit room temperature uncovered until we're ready to stuff them. So now we're going to cut the cheese and start stuffing. So what I want to do, this is panela. It's a semi-firm cheese here in Mexico. It actually, it doesn't melt. It's sort of like a paneer. So if you can't find this, you can use paneer as a substitute. I really like this cheese because you can grill it, you can saute it, and it holds its shape. I want this cheese because I don't want the cheese to completely melt inside of the chile ancho and kind of go everywhere, especially once I'm putting it in the hot oil to fry. I don't want any of that cheese to leak out. So that's why I'm using this cheese. So we can go ahead and be pretty liberal in our pieces. I'm going to cut about 1/4 inch thick slices. I may need to trim them just depending on the size of the ancho, but we'll see. I have some pretty big anchos, so they can kind of take this. Okay, and now what we want to do is just take our chile ancho. These have been sort of drying out a little bit. So you can see the inside is nice and seed-free. Also, it's really, really soft, and the inside is kind of like, it's almost like a date. It's really, really soft, and it's reconstituted very well. All right, so what I want to do, I think I'll use this one. I'm going to take the cheese and then just stick it in there. And if you rip the sides a little bit, that's totally fine. We're going to use some toothpicks to kind of help keep everything together. And that's basically what you want. Just a nice chile ancho filled with a nice big hunk of cheese. All right, so now we're going to separate eggs. So we're going to work on the batter part. So I'm just going to put my whites in the bowl of a stand mixer. and keep the yolks separate. So this batter is going to be basically beaten egg whites with a little bit of masarina, and then we will use the yolks as well. But we're going to keep them separate to give us some nice volume and a really pretty airy texture. All right, so now I've got some masarina here. I'm actually using red masarina, so this is from red corn grown here in Mexico. But you can use white. You can really use whatever color you want because this is going to be sort of the undercoating of the chile relleno. So basically, when you're typically creating a fry station, usually dredge whatever you're frying in flour first. Instead of flour, we're using masarina. So all I'm going to do is take my chile ancho that has been stuffed, and we've got a little toothpick to help us out, and we just want to push it into the masa to coat. This is not really to create a crust. This is, again, just to give the egg whites and yolks something to hold on to. It'll also give a little extra flavor than if you were just using flour. So we're just gonna kind of shake this off a little bit, and it's gonna be really delicious. Yeah, super easy. All right, so you can do this by hand, or you can do this with a hand mixer, or you can use a stand mixer. I think it's faster with a stand mixer, obviously, but if you need a workout, use a whisk. So what I'm doing is I am putting the egg whites in the stand mixer. I just whisked up my egg yolks. We're going to add those once we get stiff peaks on our egg whites. I just added a 1/4 teaspoon of salt to this, and now we've got our whisk attachment. We're going to put this on, and we're going to just whip this on high for about 3 to 4 minutes until we get the stiff peaks, and then we'll add the yolks. All right, we are just at stiff peak. So now I'm going to keep the motor running, but on lower speed, and add in the beaten yolks. So now we're at this really beautiful, creamy, pale yellow color. You can see it's deflated a little bit. We're not at stiff peaks, obviously, anymore because we put the egg yolks in there, but it's really beautiful and ready to go. So now what we're going to do is we're going to heat up our oil to 400 degrees in a cast iron skillet, and then we're going to do this a la minute. As soon as the oil is ready, I'm going to dip into the batter and then drop it into the fryer. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to take one of our chiles, and then we're going to dip it into the egg mixture. Make sure you coat both sides. And you don't have to go get really super fussy with it. And then once it's nicely coated, just lay it into the oil, but lay it away from you so that if any oil splashes, it splashes towards the wall and not towards you. So just like this. And then a technique that's commonly used here is to just take a little bit of oil and then just kind of splash it over the top, just so we kind of cooked that. And then after it's been in the oil for just a few minutes and you can see some browning around the edges, we will give it a little flip. Okay. All right, they're all done. It's time to plate. I am so hungry. I haven't eaten lunch. So this is my favorite part of this video where I actually get to taste it. So remember, pull out the toothpick before you go in, or just be aware that it's there. And I'm just going to go right in. There's so many textures in this. The really nice thing about the egg batter over the top is it just absorbs and holds onto all that salsa. And so you get like the charred flavors, you get like
a little bit of the caramelization of the onion and tomato. The heat isn't really that intense, despite the fact that I use three serranos and one jalapeno. Um, it's to me, it's a very nice kind of gentle, warming heat. It might be really intense for somebody else, but I really like it because the ancho is so mild and sweet. I feel like you really need that hit of acidity and the spice from the jalapeno and the serranos. One thing to note on the salsa, if you're using tomatoes that maybe are a little bit out of season or not that flavorful, you may want to hit it with a little bit of lime juice just to wake it up. These tomatoes, I mean, luckily for me, living in Mexico, the tomatoes here are always really bright and acidic, so I never ever have to add any lime juice or any acid to my salsas. But obviously, in the U.S., things are a little bit different with grocery store tomatoes. This is an incredibly delicious and kind of surprising dish. The fact that a dried chili ancho can become so sublimely soft and succulent and full of fruity flavors. I really hope you enjoyed this demo and I hope you try this at home. Thank you.
Thank you, Rick. I enjoyed the valuable cultural insights and cooking techniques you shared through this recipe. I'm sure you've inspired many of us in today's audience to give this a try. If you haven't already, please make sure you save this recipe for chiles, anchos, rellenos de queso in the handouts tab. And that about wraps things up for this first installment in the CIA's new virtual Latin American Cuisine Summit series. Thank you for joining us today, and we hope to see you for the second installment in September when Chef Jesus Choi Cervantes will prepare spinach tetela and corn tamal. And with that, on behalf of the Smart Brief team, I want to thank the Culinary Institute of America and Chef Martinez for sharing his recipe and a piece of his culinary culture with us. And I'd like to thank the Texas Beef Council for their sponsorship of our event. And of course, our biggest thank you goes out to all of you here with us today. It is only possible to have events like this by sharing your comments, questions, and your curiosity. I have loved being a part of this with you all today, and I hope I will see you all again soon. Until next time, have an absolutely magical day. Take care.